The illusion of respect through gentleness. You tried to be good, tried to be gentle, kind, understanding. You gave more than you received, yielded more than you should have, stayed silent when you should have stood tall. And all of it out of respect, out of love, out of some imagined memory you thought others would hold of you. But time went by, and when you needed them, there was only emptiness. No one mentioned your name. No one stood up for you. No one remembered God. And the worst part isn't the forgetting. It's realizing it happened precisely because you tried to be remembered through kindness. The world does not reward disarmed gentleness. The world does not remember those who never imposed consequence. Human reality is raw, and Machiavelli saw it with unveiled eyes. He didn't speak of cruelty. He spoke of clarity, and his clarity was brutal. It is better to be feared than loved, if you cannot be both. And you chose to be loved, chose to be good, waited for recognition. But you didn't see that kindness, without structure, becomes invisibility. The pain of being forgotten doesn't begin when your name disappears. It starts much earlier, on the day you realize you're always doing the right thing, but no one notices, that you're always available, but no one remembers, that you're present, but never a presence. That is the vibrational void of the man who never demands, of the man who only gives, of the man who believes virtue is not disturbing, who believes being pleasing is the gateway to respect. But respect is not born from free affection. Respect is born from the predictability of consequence, from the weight of presence, from the silent clarity that there is a line, and that if it's crossed, there will be loss. Titus Livius told stories of sweet kings, peaceful rulers, just men who believed goodness was enough. All were betrayed, all were forgotten. None of them shaped the course of history. But the tyrants, they were hated, but remembered. They were feared, but etched into memory because they left a scar. And human memory is more loyal to pain than to tenderness fades. Pain shapes. Tenderness invites. Pain defines. And maybe now you realize that the pain you feel isn't just others abandoned, it's the absence of structure within yourself. You lived to be accepted, but what you really wanted was to be felt. You sought approval, but what you needed was to be noticed. Yet no one notices what is always available. No one respects someone who never sets a limit. No one values what is always present, even when ignored. And deep down, your kindness wasn't a virtue. It was a desperate attempt to soothe an ancestral pain. The pain of having been invisible for too long. You were taught to be good, but no one taught you to be whole. No one showed you that kindness without authority becomes empty self-assertion. It becomes a veiled plea for love, a subtle cry for belonging. And that, the world senses. And when the world senses that you need to be accepted, it rejects you. Because the energy you emit isn't one of power, it's one of need. And need doesn't generate memory. Need generates comfort for others. And then, forget this is the beginning. The silent revelation that something must change, that you can no longer rely on goodness because kindness without presence is silence without echo, and presence without limits is open ground for abuse. You weren't forgotten by chance. You were forgotten because you never imposed enough to be remembered. That ends the energetic mistake of trying to manifest respect through disarmed gentleness. You believe your gentleness will be seen as maturity, that your softness will be viewed as strength. But what your presence radiates is fear. The body feels it, the environment senses it. You walk in silently, but it's not the silence that commands. It's the silence that pleads. And there is a brutal difference between a man who is silent because he controls and a man who is silent because he fears. Most men don't understand this. They try to attract respect as if trying to seduce with kindness. They believe soft energy, a calm voice, a compassionate look are doors to admiration. But the universe doesn't respond to intention. It responds to actual frequency. And when the real frequency is submission, all your effort sounds like polite weakness. You don't need to scream to be weak. Just smile when you should stand firm. Just justify yourself when you should be silent. Just accept when you should walk away. Your gentleness, when disarmed, is an invitation to disrespect. Not because you are less, but because you vibrate less. and the world responds. Kindness without backbone is like a flower without roots. It may look beautiful for a while, but it won't hold, it won't anchor, it won't shape its surround. You become a breeze in a world of storms, a presence that dissipates, not one that leaves a mark. And the more you try to soften your expression, the more your presence communicates absence. You are not forgotten because you are kind. You are forgotten because your kindness imposes no consequence, because your energy draws no boundary, because your presence doesn't shift the field. And in the real world, we only remember what transformed, what forced adaptation, what changed the frequency of the room. And that is only possible when your energy carries limits, when your kindness is a choice, not a defense. The mistake isn't in being good, it's in being good out of fear. It's in believing that being gentle is enough, that being understanding will shield, that being polite will protect you. It won't. Respect is not born from delicacy. It is born from the energetic coherence between what you feel and what you project. If you try to be gentle to please, your energy screams insecurity. But if you are gentle because you have enough power not to need to prove anything, then yes, gentleness becomes strength. Respect is not the result of good intentions. It's a side effect of a presence that demands adjustment, and no one adjusts their behavior for someone who demands nothing. Your tone of voice can be soft, your expression can be calm, but your energy must be firm. Otherwise, you will be mistaken for fragility. And fragility, in the collective unconscious, is always expended. How social dopamine undermines your silent authority. There's a subtle addiction eroding your presence. And it doesn't stem from visible weakness, but from the imperceptible chase for tiny tokens of validation. Every prompt response to a message, every expected like, each glance you try to capture. Unbeknownst to you, your mind has been conditioned to crave micro-approvals to feel seen. And when that happens, your gravity dissolves. You start seeking affection, not impact. You act to be noticed, not to be remembered. And in that silent process, your presence fades away. It adapts. It molds to others' reactions. What should be a center becomes a reflection. What should be magnetism turns into anxiety. Social dopamine doesn't shout, it whispers. It rewards you with small emotional crumbs, an emoji, a chuckle, positive feedback. And thus, the brain ties presence to immediate return. But respect isn't immediate. Impact isn't micro-dosed. True presence intimidates before it's admired. And that's when your authority begins to slip. Because you start calculating words to please, measuring looks to fit in, editing spontaneity to avoid displeasing. The price, your depth vanishes. And what remains is a man who acts to be loved, not to be remembered. Presence that transforms a room doesn't ask for confirmation. It doesn't need likes, applause, feedback. It commands silence. It shifts the air. It changes the mood. And that only happens when the source of your vibration isn't external. It's internal, when you no longer live awaiting a reaction, but staying true to respect doesn't bloom in the anxiety of response. It grows from mystery, from pause, from not knowing what others are thinking, yet remaining whole. Every time you adjust to someone's gaze, your presence fragments. Every time you await validation, your power dissipates. You don't need to be seen all the time. You need to be felt. And men who are felt don't need to show up. Because real presence doesn't depend on light, it emanates. And once you understand that, social dopamine loses its grip because your soul stops begging for micro-affection and starts radiating authority. Silent, untouchable, memorable. Beware the San Francisco syndrome. When the light becomes an escape from presence, there's a silent trap in the desire to be too good, hiding behind gestures of peace, soothing words, restrained smiles. What looks like light often becomes avoidance. The man who insists on being always peaceful, always understanding, always elevated, may actually be fleeing his own shadow, not out of malice, but fear. Fear to impose, fear to displease, fear to take up too much space. The San Francisco syndrome is more common than it seems. It's the impulse to always be the light in every setting, even when those settings require a sword. The urge to forgive everything, accept everything, understand everything, while your soul cries out for boundary, for limit, for real presence. Not the kind that pleases, but the kind that transforms. Many men hide behind spirituality because they can't bear their own power. Light becomes refuge, kindness becomes disguise, and silence becomes fear of saying no, of opposing, of taking a stand, as if being firm were a sin, as if imposing oneself violated some divine law. It doesn't. True spirituality is not the absence of hardness, it's the presence of integrity. Machiavelli saw it. Virtue without coercive ability is disguised fragility. Being good doesn't mean staying silent. Being elevated doesn't mean accepting everything. Being light doesn't mean fleeing shadow. It means facing it, integrating it, and using it when needed. Because there are times when forgiveness equals self-sabotage, and spaces where understanding equates to sacrificing your dignity. Spiritual presence isn't about bowing to everything. It's about standing, even when all around demands submission. Don't confuse light with docility. Light is clarity, internal firmness, the ability to shine without dimming for others. The man who confuses spirituality with powerlessness ends up like a candle in the wind, always vulnerable, always extinguishable. Peace isn't the absence of conflict, it's the presence of structure. Kindness isn't the absence of limit, it's coherence with your truth. And true light doesn't fear wielding darkness when necessary to restore balance. What you call spirituality may secretly be fear of losing others' love, fear of disappointing those who expect you to always be calm, always gentle, always kind. But the soul wasn't made simply to please. It was made to be whole. And wholeness sometimes shines, other times wounds, but always commands. Because real sacredness never bends to convenience. It asserts. And those who feel respect the silent fact that sabotages your manifestation of presence. You say you want respect. You claim you want to be noticed, but what your vibration communicates is begging for affection. There's a chasm between what your words say and what your body transmits silently. And in that gap, your presence dissolves. You enter a room asking for space, but your posture asks for acceptance. You speak firmly, yet your eyes beg for warmth. You try to seem centered, but your field radiates insecurity. The world doesn't listen to your words, it feels your vibration. And when that vibration is emotional scarcity, no speech is enough. Incoherence is the hidden poison of presence. It makes your energy feel inconsistent, even when your speech is rehearsed. It nullifies the impact of your words, even when they're correct. You behave as if you want respect, but you vibrate as if you're pleading for love. And the result is invisibility. No one respects someone who radiates lack. Emotional scarcity is a frequency that invites manipulation, that attracts abuse, that breeds disinterest. Not because the world is cruel, but because it's energetic. It responds to the dominant vibration. And the dominant vibration of a man who needs acceptance is weakness. True presence doesn't seek response. It demands silence. It doesn't wait to be validated. It stands on its own. And when a man stands on his own, he becomes magnetic. Because respect is born from internal space, from a body that doesn't wave, from a gaze that doesn't need justification, from words that don't crave feedback. You don't need to prove you're good. You need to sustain who you are. And that only happens when your energy and intention align. When what you feel inside is exactly what you project outward. Without adjustments, without filters, without emotional dependency on your environment. A man who splits himself to be accepted loses his presence even before opening his mouth. He enters the room and isn't felt. He speaks and isn't heard. He works and gets forgotten. Because his energy doesn't communicate authority. It communicates need, and need repels. Respect starts in the body, in the vibration, in the integrity between what you feel and what you radiate. And that isn't taught. It's rebuilt, in silence, with presence, and with the total relinquishment of expecting love from those who never saw you whole. The technique of the cutting presence. What you keep silent that should be command. There are two types of silence. One that protects, and one that destroys. Silence born of awareness is power, but silence born of fear is loss. And many men remain silent not by choice, but because they were trained not to disturb. Not to defy, not to hurt. In that silence, something fractures. What should be command becomes absence. What should be a bound becomes open ground for abuse. You weren't forgotten because you spoke little. You were forgotten because you never issued commands. Because even when you felt something was unfair, you pulled back. You swallowed it. You rationalized it. And everyone notices. The body senses when a soul is begging for respect, but lacks the courage to impose it. Cutting presence isn't shouting. It's not dominance by force. It's looking someone in the eye, and not begging. It's holding a no, without explanation. It's asserting a boundary, with the calm of someone unafraid of losing. When your words become pleas, the room absorbs weakness. When your words become boundaries, the room recalibrates. No argument, no tension, just presence. You don't need to become aggressive. You need to become someone who doesn't ask for what should be ordered, who doesn't negotiate what should be non-negotiable, who doesn't smile when you should leave, who doesn't consent just to keep the peace. Because peace bought with self-denial is a silent war against yourself. The cutting presence technique arises from leaving justification behind, from abandoning the need to please. It's speaking little, but with the tone of someone setting the atmosphere. It's saying a sentence, and not circling back to confirm, not repeating to reinforce, not trying to sound likable. Because what you say, when it comes from the soul, already carries the vibration of command. The world listens more to those who speak less, because scarcity of well-placed words has more impact than excessive explanation. Every time you recalibrate your presence to fit others' comfort, your words lose weight. But every time you speak from your internal truth, even in silence, something shifts in the field. The question isn't what you want to say. It's what you've kept silent for too long. What you swallow is what's eroding your presence. What you avoid saying is what sabotages your memory. Because the man who doesn't turn word into command becomes a spectator of his own life. And no one respects someone who watches while they're erased. What the curator archetype's shadow reveals about your social impotence. Some men become healers because they were deeply wounded once, and, unknowingly, they turn others' healing into a way to avoid their own inner confrontation. They learn to listen to everyone, except themselves, to help everyone, except themselves. And slowly they turn the gift of listening into an emotional prison. They become too good, too available, too accessible, and invisible. The curator's shadow isn't in his generosity, it's in his escape. Because the more he dedicates to others, the more he hides what he needs to cut, what needs to be imposed, what needs to end. He calls it compassion, but often it's fear. Fear of being rejected if he hardens, fear of being hated if he sets bounds, fear of being forgotten if he stops serving. But the opposite happens. The more useful you become, the more disposable you turn. The more you give, the more is demanded. The more you understand, the more you're surpassed. And that's not the world's cruelty. It's vibrational logic. What doesn't impose is surpassed. What has no boundary is exploited. Plutarch already said, "He who does not impose a limit teaches the other to abuse." And you, by silencing your anger, suffocating your frustration, rationalizing each wound, created an open field. A field where your presence carries no weight, where your words don't cut, where your existence is perceived as a resource, not a structure. You're not here to save others, you're here to embody your wholeness. And wholeness isn't constant gentleness, it's conscious hardness. It's the capacity to help, and to say enough, to listen, and to walk away, to embrace and to impose. The healer who doesn't know his shadow becomes a servant. The healer who doesn't acknowledge his fury becomes a martyr. And the world doesn't respect silent martyrs. It respects firm presences, who know how to love, but also how to close the door, who know how to listen, but also how to distance, who know how to heal, but never at the cost of their own dignity. When you start using your light to avoid conflict, it stops being light, it becomes a shield. And shields don't command, they only protect. And protecting too much is the first step to disappearance. Because no one respects someone who is always there to fix. But everyone respects someone who, once, knows where to cut, and cuts, without anger, but with precision. True story, the man who lost everything by being too good, and what changed when he chose silence as a strategy. He was a therapist. He listened to everyone, held everyone up, always available. always understand, never reacted harshly, never demanded recognition. His energy was light, his words always kind. For years, he believed his goodness was his greatest strength, but slowly, he realized that very goodness was what made him invisible. Patience took advantage of his time. His family overwhelmed him with expectations. His business partners left him out of the most important decision. He didn't realize that with each concession, he lost a piece of himself. Every time he said yes out of compassion, the other learned they could push further. Every time he smiled to keep the peace, he taught others that his presence was open ground, a field where anything could be sown, except respect. Then came the betrayal. It wasn't a single, it was the buildup of small neglects that culminated in abandonment. He found himself alone, exhausted, voiceless, and more than anything with the feeling that no one had truly seen, as if his presence had been useful, but never memorable, as if his soul had been warm, but never respected. In that silence, something changed within him. Not out of anger, but out of exhaustion. For the first time, he didn't explain, didn't justify, didn't beg. He simply disappeared. And there, in the silence that once felt like weakness, a new power was born. He understood that he no longer needed to bow to be accepted, that he no longer needed to become light to heal other people's dark. His speech changed. Few words, firm presence, direct gaze, and above all, strategic absence. He stopped being always available, stopped explaining his choices, and curiously, that's when they began to respect him. When he stopped offering his energy at all costs. The environment recalibrated. Those who once ignored him began to feel the weight of his absence. Those who exploited him began to choose their words more carefully because his silence now had edges, had limits, had weight. He was no longer the too good man. He was whole enough to walk away, present enough to be remembered, even in absence. And there, he realized, it's not your goodness that will protect you. It's your ability to remain whole, even when the entire world expects you to break apart to fit in. The too good man was forgotten, but the whole man became a presence no one dared disrespect again. The spiritual illusion of wanting to be light in spaces that demand a sword. There's a sweet lie many men tell themselves, that by being light enough, the world will respect them. That by being understanding, elevated, kind, injustice will retreat, aggression will dissolve, disrespect will turn into admiration. But that rarely happens, because some environments don't ask for light. They ask for a sword, and those who enter these fields armed only with prayer leave with wounds even faith can't heal. Misunderstood spirituality becomes strategic weakness. It turns into a symbolic shield used to deny one's own power to confront. You say you've evolved, but deep down you're just avoiding conflict. You say you forgive, but in truth you simply don't have the courage to set a boundary. You say you're peaceful, but your body trembles at the thought of losing, of being misunderstood, of being seen as difficult. The problem is that the universe doesn't react to what you say. It responds to what you vibrate, and your vibration is one of surrender, not conscious surrender, but surrender of self, as if saying, do whatever you want with me, as long as I don't lose your affection. And in social fields, that is an invitation to abuse, a password to be forgotten. The law of quantum resonance doesn't obey the goodness you verbalize. It responds to the structure you sustain. And if, upon entering a space, your energy radiates doubt, fear, or submission disguised as compassion, you will be treated as a resource, not as a presence. And no one respects what only knows how to give. Being light is not about accepting it's about discerning when darkness demands firmness, when injustice demands a voice, when the environment demands a sword. And a sword doesn't need to cut with violence. It only needs to exist, to be perceived, to be there, silently, as a symbol that the love you offer comes with limits. It's not your light that protects you. It's your ability to hold presence within the shadow. And that can't be taught through mantras or theories. It's earned through vibrational practice, through the courage not to yield, through silence that doesn't accept but observes, through words that don't plead but position. True spirituality doesn't make you fragile. It makes you whole. It makes you capable of embracing without disappearing, of understanding without accepting everything, of loving without bowing. And only then does your light stop being an illusion and become a path few dare to walk. Because it shines, but also wounds. And what wounds with integrity commands respect, even in the dark, even in silence. The three-layer presence, a vibrational structure to never be forgotten again. Presence that leaves a mark doesn't come from trying to be noticed. It comes from inner silence that doesn't need to justify itself. From a body that takes up space without arrogance. From a gaze that doesn't seek to be loved, but carries the certainty of being whole. And this presence is not a gift. It's structure. It's the result of a vibrational field built in layers. 3, to be exact. Each one supporting the other. Each one healing the emptiness of the one before. The first layer is clear awareness of your own authority. Not the kind of authority that yells, but the one that knows who it is. The one that doesn't depend on the setting, on approval, on applause. It's the awareness that your worth doesn't lie in others' responses. It lives at the center of your being. When a man enters a room with that awareness, the space takes note, not because he forces it, but because he is. The second layer is the nonverbal language of silent power. It's the body that doesn't fidget, the gaze that doesn't want, the breath that doesn't rush. It's the absence of urgency to fill silence. Because the man who knows who he is doesn't compete for space. He simply occupies, and that's why he's remembered. Because there's something in his presence that cuts through the noise, that organizes the room, that invites respect, without asking. Third layer is the well-defined energetic and physical boundary. It's the invisible edge that protects your integrity. It's not about withdrawing from the world. It's about knowing exactly how far others can go, knowing when to end a conversation, when to step back, when to close an exchange, and all of it, without anger, without drama, only with clarity. Because the energy that sets limits without tension is the most respected energy. When these 3 layers align, something shifts. You no longer need to ask for respect. It happens. Your presence becomes density. Your words become reference. Your absence becomes memory. And most importantly, your energy stops being negotiable. You become someone who is present, but not accessible just anyway. Who is kind, but never overly available. Who is gentle, but never predictable. And that, to the world, is unforgettable. Because the man who masters his own field becomes impossible to ignore, even when he says nothing, even when he's just in silence. Why most fail in seeking spiritual respect? The confusion between kindness and energetic weakness. Many men confuse spirituality with submission. They believe that being evolved means being docile, that being elevated means never imposing, that being whole means accepting everything in the name of love. And that's where they lose themselves, because they mistake kindness for lack of structure, gentleness for fear, peace for the absence of bound, and the result is always the same: disrespect. Spiritual respect doesn't stem from softness. It comes from integrity. And integrity at times requires hardness. It requires cutting. It requires absence. It requires firmness. The field of a man who carries true spiritual authority is not always welcoming. Sometimes it's intimidating. Not through violence, but through density, through clarity, through a vibration that says without words, not here. Machiavelli was brutally direct when he said, "Men more quickly forget the death of their father than the loss of their inheritance." And this quote reveals more than a political view. It lays bare human nature. It shows that respect is more tied to the impact you make than to the morality the world senses when you are harmless. And because of that, it forgets you. The world senses when your energy bends. And because of that, it uses you. The kind of spirituality that commands respect doesn't justify itself. It doesn't beg for recognition. It doesn't try to convince anyone of its light. It simply is. And by being, it alters the environment. Most fail because they try to appear elevated. But deep down, they still vibrate with the fear of displeasing. Still long to be loved by all. Still fear the loneliness that comes from taking a stand. But there is a silent truth that must be said. The man who wants to be respected must let go of the desire to be liked. He must accept that integrity sometimes breeds dislike. That firm presence sometimes intimidates. That spiritual clarity often wounds those who live off illusion. And that is not cruelty. It is wholeness. Because what sustains your dignity is not how accepted, but how faithful you are to what you feel. And when that fidelity becomes your priority, respect is no longer something you chase. It becomes a consequence. You stop pleasing in order to exist, and you begin to exist as a force that does not bend. And that, in the language of the invisible, is the only form of spirituality that will never be forgotten. The memory of the strong and the forgetting of the gentle. There's a silence that sets in when you realize you've spent years trying to be remembered for being good. That you built your image with gentleness, with devotion, with care, and yet you were forgotten. Because no one holds in memory what caused no change. No one remembers the presence that conformed to the environment, only the impact that forced the environment to conform. Machiavelli knew, remembrance is the child of impact, not intention. The name that survives the passage of time is the one that disrupted patterns, the one that reversed expectations, the one that caused discomfort before it earned respect. And you spent too much time trying to be light, when in truth, what the world needed to feel from you was weight. Petrarch wrote of the pain felt by those who lived to please others, and lost themselves in the process. The man who wants to be liked by all drifts away from his own axis. He soft tames his presence, and when he finally looks back, he sees that he did everything right, except for himself. The inner silence that once felt like guilt now becomes a signal, the sign that the era of agreeableness is over, and that the next cycle demands presence, firmness, choice. It's not about being harsh out of revenge, nor about becoming aggressive to impose respect. It's about no longer negotiating your truth, no longer hiding your firmness behind spiritual excuses, no longer carrying the burden of goodness as your identity. Because true spirituality begins when you stop using kindness as an emotional crutch. You don't need to be remembered for being good. You need to be remembered for being real, for the density of what you uphold, for the clarity with which you take a stand, for the absence that triggers silence, for the presence that reorganizes space. It's not your softness that will leave a legacy. It's your structure. The fact that, when you entered, the atmosphere shifted. When you spoke, something realigned. And when you left, everyone felt something had been lost. The world doesn't respect intentions. It respects signals, vibrations, boundaries. And above all, respect is born from the clarity that you are willing to walk away if you are not treated with wholeness. The man who shapes himself to be accepted dissolves into the background, but the man who holds his ground, even when it displeases, becomes unforgettable. You tried to be remembered through kindness. Now, it's time to be remembered through truth. And truth sometimes wounds, but it always transforms, and the world only remembers what forced it to change. The rest fades into silence. You weren't born to be silence without edge. You were born to be vibrational memory, so that even in your absence, respect remains. As a mark, as a symbol, as a warning, that for a time, someone stood there who asked for nothing, but imposed everything, in silent presence, forever.